All right. So it's been a couple minutes here, so I don't keep laughing at all the wonderful compliments I'm getting from both my own team and y'all out there. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamal. I'll be hosting the webinar today. As a heads up, as always, the webinar will be recorded, will be made available after today. So keep your eyes on the emails afterward if you want to get a replay or share with other folks around you. And if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the Q&A section, put it in the chat. I'll be collecting them at the end for a Q&A section, so you can ask these two very smart individuals any questions that you have. But that said, you're here for adjusting for everyone, making the complex approachable. You're in the right spot. If you're looking for something else, stick around anyway. There's going to be some pretty cool folks here. So check it out here. I want to pass it off over to Jeff Ledbetter and Annie Cahill, and they will be bringing you this awesome information. Take it away, folks.
Man, thanks a lot there, Jamal. I'm so glad that we've added an MC to our ranks.
I'm happy to be here, Jeff. I'm doing it for you.
Bring a lot of energy to the team. I really appreciate your introduction there. And we're excited to jump into this topic. Excited to see so many of you joining us again here in 2022. Who can believe that it's 2022? That's blowing my mind a little bit, but really appreciate it. I'm joined by Annie Cahill, familiar face to everybody on the webinar series. And she's going to start us off taking us through our discussion today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Well,
actually,
hi,
I'm going to pause you for a second, just real quick, as we were saying, we are muted. Are you all still muted? You can't hear us or anything like that?
I think were they asking if the attendees are muted?
Yeah, I think the attendees are all muted for quality assurance. Just
okay. I wasn't sure if you all muted in the sense of they couldn't hear you all. I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
so, yeah, the attendees are muted for sure.
So let's just state right up front that we'll have a Q&A period at the end here. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Jamal will be there watching those, monitoring those. And if he feels like something's relevant, he'll break in and let us know. And then if you want to ask us a specific question, we can certainly do that during the Q&A period as well. Take it away, Annie.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. And I'm still wishing people a happy new year because we're in January. So I'm going to make it weird right out of the gate because y'all know that's what I do. And I hope you're all doing very well. I did want to take a second just to acknowledge that we had 4 firefighters pass away in Baltimore yesterday. 3 actually, I think. I think there's a 4th one in critical condition. So just want to thank them for their service and acknowledge that. And thank all of our public safety people and those of you who support public safety for your service. So wanted to start off today with our very exciting addressing webinar. So we are talking about making complex addressing issues approachable. And I guess, Jeff, if you want to go ahead and advance the next slide. Part of this conversation is really about challenges in our workflows as addressing authorities. And I know if you're new to any webinar that I've done, I've worked in local government GIS for about 15 years. I was an addressing authority for a long time. I've worked with many of you on our webinars on your strategic plans or your QAPs and gotten to know a lot of you very well and what your challenges are and had the pleasure of helping you work through those. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And then we're also going to talk about a solution that Datamark has to kind of address, no pun intended, pun kind of intended, your challenges. So this is a typical kind of addressing workflow. Now this one is kind of geared toward public safety, as you see, but generally with a lot of you, what happens is the address request comes in. So that's either going to be through email, or maybe you have a form that you receive in person, or through fax, still using fax machines out there. Just any way you have a request coming in, phone calls, or someone kind of like comes up to your desk and interrupts your whole day. And you know how that goes, right? Especially if they don't have all of the requisite information that's needed to assign the address, then you could kind of be there for like 2 hours, right? I'm not projecting at all in this workflow. So the request comes in, the address is assigned, and we have in the past discussed these different assignment methods that you guys use. Some of you have like grid systems, some of you are doing like the 5.28 feet or other interval. Some of you are doing the very sophisticated winging it, because that's just what you've always done. That's what was done before you, where you just kind of interpolate the address, right? You have, 115 on one side, 119 on the other side. So you just kind of go with what works. Some of you don't have any assignment process, and other people are assigning that for you, right? So maybe a developer is deciding that they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down one or the other side of the street, with not much regard to public safety best practices. That's definitely another conversation for another time, but it's one that we've had in the past, right? So the address assignment process really occurs in many different ways, okay, depending on who the addressing authority is and the business need, all right? At some point, generally, the address is entered into GIS if you're using GIS, okay? Again, this is really geared toward like a workflow where someone's using GIS and there's, public safety kind of component there. But some people do enter their addresses into their master address point file in their GIS. So now I will say that a lot of times we see this workflow kind of flipped. Sometimes it becomes official, and then I don't know, there's many different ways that we see this, especially when it comes to actually distributing the address. So when there's a notification that occurs, we hope that the address has already been made official, and that's been entered into GIS, and then it goes out and is distributed. But sometimes there's no QC process, and the address actually gets distributed before there's a chance to QC, and then sometimes you can find yourself in a bad way there, especially when the address goes into rotation, right? And it's being used officially by the property owners. So at some point, that GIS data is provisioned into your different systems. Now here we have public safety called out, but you're also using your address points for your asset management programs, for your permitting. And if you guys would, I'd like you to drop in your chat, what other systems in your locality are using your address points data for your GIS? Besides like public safety. I mean, I know this is Datamark, we're a public safety company, but we acknowledge that there are many different data models. Yeah, utility billing, yeah, permitting, property assessment. So would you say that your address points are really, really, really important to a lot of your enterprise systems in your locality? Would that be fair to say? Yeah, Jim says yes.
There's a couple of really interesting ones, Annie, for social services and for 311. We think so much about 911, but there's also 211 and 311, which are rendering citizen services as well. And it's all based on that point of service delivery location.
Yep, exactly. And we have a lot of different webinars out on our YouTube channel. If you guys want to go back and look, we have a lot of different addressing webinars that really go over the addressing process and how important it is. But this is really to address the challenges within the workflow, because we have a solution that specifically addresses workflow challenges. So once that data is provisioned, it becomes in use, right? It's an official address, it's in use within your systems. The people who are using the addresses, the property owners, the tenants, they're using their addresses. Of course, mail delivery, Amazon, which is very relevant to me. The Amazon guy knows me very well, for better or worse. Then at some point, maybe not, you may or may not have a discrepancy process. Okay, for some people, you have a very clearly defined discrepancy reporting process. So it may come in the form of a ticketing system whereby someone identifies a discrepancy in the GIS data, or if they go out and they respond to an emergency and it's identified that they are posting the wrong address, and that needs to be made corrected in the GIS data or in real life, whatever that looks like, there's a ticket entered. But it can also mean that some people send an email to the addressing authority, or they, pick up the phone and they call you, or even better, you have a very sophisticated post-it note system. We've talked to a lot of our clients who say, yeah, I just get a post-it note on my desk of any addressing errors. So, that's a very common thing too. It's obviously not the best, but it's been working, right? So there is kind of like this idea of an addressing life cycle within different localities and municipalities, and it may look a little bit different depending on where you are. So let's talk about some of those challenges. So we can go to the next slide, Jeff. So sometimes the challenges are in the workflow itself. Maybe you don't have a clearly defined workflow. Like I said, sometimes you might make an address official before it's reviewed by relevant parties, and therefore it goes into rotation, and it's kind of difficult to kind of go back and correct those, especially if it's already in use by the property owner. Sometimes you don't have a clearly defined process for reporting discrepancies, so things kind of fall through the cracks. You can have lots of challenges with your addressing authorities. We know, and especially if you've been in some of our previous webinars, that addressing is very, very important for public safety. It's pretty much the reason why we assign addresses. But if you have addressing authorities who are not very in touch with public safety, or if they are kind of not especially in touch with NG 911 requirements, it can be challenging, okay? I see we have a lot of talk in the chat. I love that. That's awesome. I wish I'll go back and read this when I can, but you guys are great. I love this participation.
Yep, we're marking down some of these questions, and we're definitely going to address a couple of them at the end there.
Oh, nice. Okay. Thanks, Josh. So a lot of times you can have challenges with your addressing authorities. Okay. What are the risks when you have someone assigning addresses who is unaware of the implications for public safety? What if you don't manage address points at all? There are lots of different implications with addressing authorities and with address management. And the other thing is that often your addressing authorities, because they may not be GIS people necessarily, you might have an addressing authority in planning or public safety. We can't assume that they all use or know GIS. Often, somebody has the ability to assign an address who might be working the front desk of a permitting office. And so she just kind of looks at a book and says, here's your address. So that person may not have any knowledge of GIS at all. Okay, so there's kind of like this diversity among addressing authorities, and not only where they occur within the municipality or within the locality, but also their knowledge level about different things. So data management is another big one. Again, are you using GIS as your system of record? Are you documenting addresses in an Excel spreadsheet? How are you managing that data? Are you writing it down on a piece of paper? Are you not writing it down at all? Do you have historic address maps? We've talked about this before. A lot of you guys are able to do it 100% in the GIS environment. Some of you are still using paper maps or Mylars. That's very common. Another common challenge that we see significantly is that there's no formalized QA or QC process. If there's one person assigning address points or addresses in general, and they pass that on to GIS, what does the QC process look like there? Are you ensuring that all of the addresses are reflected in the road centerline ranges? Are you ensuring that you're assigning addresses that are in sequential order to your numbering system? So these are all very important things that need to be addressed. And this is a very common thing that we talk about in a lot of our strategic planning workshops. The distribution process, that's fun. When I used to do address management, we had to type up a paper form. We had to fax some people wanted email, and then finally we scrapped the whole thing and said, you know what, y'all are just going to have to go to this website, and we're dumping all of our addresses out on this website. But you know that you have different agencies who require notification during that entire process. Okay, so once the address has been assigned, it needs to be distributed so that everyone is made aware. Even if there's not a structure in place, some people require it for, or some agencies require it for, electricity, et cetera, utilities, hookups. So there's lots of different entities that may need to be notified of a new address. And then, of course, where we start talking about addressing authorities being in different departments and addressing data being consumed by different systems at the enterprise level, we then have to start looking at the different data models, because often when we're talking about addresses, we're dealing with disparate data models. So obviously our public safety systems need to look at certain fields within our GIS data or different attributes, and our permitting system doesn't care necessarily about ESNs, right? Our permitting system cares about property identification numbers and ownership information, et cetera. So, some of you are managing multiple address points for these different business needs. I hate to see that, and that is a pain point for a lot of you. Others are executing an ETL process where they have the resources to do so. Some of you are just kind of doing the best that you can. And that means that a lot of the systems have outdated addressing information because you've provided an upload once a long time ago, and then because it's so finicky, you just haven't provided one since. We also have the issue of historical records and needing to see historical addressing for different properties. I know when I worked at the city where I worked, our planning department still needed to see addresses tied to parent tracts, even if those parent tracts did not exist anymore. So where you'd have an old farm that was subdivided into 8 or 10 lots, they still wanted to see that historic record of that address, even if that address was gone and you needed to have multiple addresses. And then, of course, we have data access issues. So again, going back to addressing authorities being in different departments, GIS kind of being a concern for some people who don't know how to use it. There are issues with accessing the data, especially if you don't have web GIS and people can't access the GIS data. It can be a problem. So these are some of the most common challenges that I see through the strategic planning process when I'm working with addressing authorities, GIS authorities, and public safety. These are very common challenges in the addressing life cycle. So as we talked before, addressing authorities come in a lot of different flavors, right? So planning and zoning is very common. We know that as a practice, GIS kind of emerged out of the planning and zoning field. So it makes sense then that a lot of addressing authorities are in planning and zoning, okay? Some of them are definitely more in touch with the public safety world than others, which can also present a challenge. Often you can see addressing authorities in public safety or within GIS. We've also seen in a few occasions where they're in public works or utilities, excuse me. We've also seen where you have multiple addressing authorities in one locality, which that is my least favorite thing because that often means there's communication issues and there's a lot of things that go along with that. So, and Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add here?
No, but I'll give you some cover for that cough so you can get a drink.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm being destroyed right now by allergies, guys. I apologize.
I'll just say there's some really great questions coming into the chat here, and so I want to keep those coming in. We're taking note of those, but there was one in particular here about retiring, canceling, and reusing a retired one, and I know that's not necessarily on the slide we're on. It's a couple back, but if you could talk a little bit about the challenge of that, I think it's a very common issue as well.
It is. I would say that, so in the event that a house burned down or something and the property was vacant for 10 years and then somebody comes back and rebuilds, I think it does kind of go back to your addressing system. Does it make sense to reuse an address if the access to the property is the same? I would say, yeah, that's okay, because like in my county, If the structure was 50 feet or less from the front of the roadway, the address was assigned based on the front door. But if it was greater than 50 feet, you had to go by the access to the property. So unless someone is cutting in a new driveway or something has changed with the access way, I would say that that's okay. We do work with a lot of localities where there's been hurricane damage and homes and neighborhoods have been completely wiped out, and they don't have the ability to just start from scratch and assign brand new addresses. And in that case, it's not necessary. Where I think the problem comes in is when you have an address and then you come in and almost do kind of like a sub-address type of situation, and you don't make that unique. So if you have a structure that's already existing, and then, you just kind of have a secondary address, but you don't make that unique, that's where it can really come in. But like I said, if the access way is the same, I think it's okay because it's just identifying the structure location. It's kind of a long-winded answer.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think the pain point comes in too, in terms of data management, just to connect it back to the current topic, number one, understanding that the idea of ever deleting an address probably shouldn't happen. There should be retirements of addresses. If you really just completely fat finger an address and it's so bad you got to redo it, do a GIS record for it, maybe you delete that. But it's a great concept to share with novice addressing authority or GIS data managers for addressing data, that you want to set up a system where you can easily just sort of flag the ones that are retired and have them not show up anymore, so that you're not worrying about later if the situation you just described, Annie, occurs and you need to reference a historical address for any given reason, that you have the data there to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we can't cover every single scenario. Obviously, my preference would be, especially when mail becomes an issue. Now, you guys have to understand, the city where I live is almost 300 years old. So we're kind of in a situation where we have to assign half addresses. Ooh, like who wants to do that? But that's kind of like a necessary evil, So you kind of have to work around the situation that you're in. And if it's appropriate, then you could reuse. If it's not appropriate, then hopefully you can find another address that fits within your system. So I think that
you never know when those historical addresses are going to become really useful for a whole host of things that you can't even imagine right now. So I'll drop that right where it lies so we don't impede our progress, but it's a fascinating topic.
It really is. It's addressing, it's as neat sometimes as it is terrifying and cumbersome.
Right.
So regarding data management, addressing is still very much a paper-driven process for a lot of you. Like I said, I've worked with some of you who are still using, Mylars and your original addressing grids from like the late 80s, 90s that are like on papyrus paper, and they're falling apart and they're holding on by Scotch tape and a prayer. It's like that whole thing. And if you, Joyce, that's me. Yeah. So, if you sneeze, like they could vaporize, you know what I mean? So a lot of you are still referencing your paper maps and your Mylars. Some of you have brought that into a GIS environment. Some of you are using other vendor software to help you assign addresses, but largely I see that a lot of paper is still being used. So plats and deeds, subdivision and development plans, especially in localities who have not implemented like a digital submission policy, your addressing forms, you might have those on the web, but people are still gonna, that's funny, a map held together with masking tape. Okay, I'm gonna stop reading the comments. I'm cracking up now. A lot of you have, addressing forms that you can have out on the web, but people download or they come in person and you give them one at the front desk. Assessor information, a lot of that is still paper-based, building permits, et cetera. And then, of course, a lot of you are still distributing paper documents. So you might generate a PDF and email it, but then you're still sending off paper documents on county letterhead or city letterhead to different agencies. So we see this very paper-driven process that's still going on. And then, of course, we've also talked about different systems being used to manage addresses. So some of you are using GIS in your addressing process, which is great, but a lot of you are not. You're still just kind of entering it into your permitting system, and that's just the way that the address is managed, because maybe the permitting department is your addressing authority, and that's just kind of like where your master record lives. But with that comes access issues, right? So if the permitting system is the system of record, how can other folks like GIS access that information? And then, of course, we talked before about the disparate data models and the need for different systems to see different types of attribute information, right? So public safety has a very specific set of attributes that it needs, depending on the CAD system and the 911 system. And then, of course, permitting or asset management has to look at other information within the same data. So it can get big really quickly. Yeah, so I've just kind of gone over this, but these are just a few examples, and you guys dropped some really good examples in the chat earlier. What are some specific challenges that you guys have with your data model? Are you experiencing issues with having one data set to meet all of your business needs, or are you finding that you have to manage different address points, layers to meet these different enterprise systems? What does that look like for you? I'm going to hop into the chat real quick and look.
Yeah, in the chat right now, there's a rolling discussion about using GPS to verify your address points.
Yeah.
That's an awesome discussion, and I'll just throw a note to Jamal to bring that up at the end, and we'll give you some perspective from our side on that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we see. And like I said, it kind of goes along with, you know, if people have super up-to-date aerials, they use their aerials to kind of verify, or, you know, some people like to take a long lunch. I would love to do that and go out and field verify some address points. But yeah, we see a lot of field verification used in that process. So the system of record is GIS. Permitting staff can enter new addresses without verification. Okay. Yeah, so again, a lot of you are, yeah, and then legacy attributes, that's kind of a whole other discussion, because yeah, this is my actual face right now. So when you start thinking about the new requirements that NG911 is placing on the data, the new demand, I should say, and then kind of trying to reconcile those with what your current business needs are, and how does that work together, right? So there is that element of needing to manage and continue maintaining those legacy attributes.
Cool. Let's see. I'm not muted. Okay, good. Yeah. So this is Annie's actual face, live footage. Except you have live footage and live footage, so that might get confusing. But we've really been talking about pain points, right? We've been talking about some of the common issues, and now we're going to talk a little bit about how we can overcome that. There have been a few themes, I think, in what you've been discussing, Annie, that I just want to highlight. One is, especially, this is true in all types of communities, but I think it's especially true in more rural or smaller communities, where they have this sort of arcane paper methodology of, you know, recording addresses, of creating addresses, of supporting the creation of addresses. And there is this paper method that's just desperately crying out in 2022 for some digital transformation, right? A tool, a workflow process, a set of tools and a set of workflows that help automate to the extent possible, but make easier through digital means, the creation and maintenance process of addressing. Then there's also some more problems that I kind of heard. I'm reading in between the lines a little bit. I'm going to insert a couple of new ones here, but especially in the more urban areas of the larger communities, you've got new addressing problems, like you talked about your 300-year-old city issuing half addresses. Maybe you're coming up against a lot of sort of densification in your city, and you're addressing a lot of accessory dwelling units or ADUs new multifamily units, you've got the granny flat out back. How do I squeeze that into the infill addressing? Is that a subunit, or is that a whole new address? And all of those call for kind of a different workflow process and need a tool a tool or set of tools that can help you manage the issues that come up with it and the data management challenges that we talked about through those. And then, of course, we've got a lot of clients on with us here that are already using our VEP product and like the addressing tools in it, but also find that it may be doing so many other things like a Swiss Army knife that they can't necessarily put it in front of their kind of front desk building technician type roles that you would love to do your GIS data entry for you because they're already assigning the addresses, but you don't want to involve them and make them become GIS experts. So those are some pain points that maybe we didn't necessarily call out, but just reading between the lines are some things that need addressing or resolution. And so we want to introduce to everybody our Cloud Assign product, Datamart Cloud Assign, which is our best effort at creating a tool that solves these specific problems for addressing authorities and or GIS data providers that are working really on addressing only. VEP itself, short for validate, edit, and provision, is a great tool and is focused and wrapped around the production and provisioning of next generation 911 data. But it has a lot of overlap with the addressing assignment kind of issues that we've been talking about today. So what we did was we went through a requirements gathering process with our product team, where we really kind of top graded the tools in VEP and added some new ones to it that are really driven at solving those specific challenges that we've been talking about today. And it's all around workflow. Workflow is what's so critical here. With the address assignment or change, the data management challenges, we've added real-time data validation out of VEP so that when you assign that address, it goes through and checks that specific address against the road center line, creates the fishbone and all the other quality validations that help prevent the fat fingering of problems from the start. Then we've also capitalized on the review and approve process of VEP, where it gives an admin or a manager of some sort the ability to check the data entry that's done. Again, targeting line level folks that are out there at the permitting desk, if that's where things get done. It gives an opportunity to look for before a bad address gets into the system and gets assigned. It gives management and or the GIS folks an opportunity to fix any sort of spatial issues or address assignment or attribute issues that may come up. And it capitalizes again on VEP's reserved street name table to make sure that while these addresses go through a long process, in most places it's a long process to go from an address request to an address assignment. And whether that's a change or a new address, this process is observed and is part of the workflow of this Cloud Assign product. And the thing that I think will be the most interesting is the automatic notification production, the production of a PDF document. Those annoying letters that all those addressing authorities are out there having to type every time, and make sure you don't fat finger anything from what you put into the GIS or what you wrote on the permit paper that came in, the request, the application that came in. Cloud Assign can automatically produce those PDF for you with your own letter templates, your logos, your words, your formatting, to be sure that when you distribute those letters, it looks just like it did when you were doing everything by hand, except the secret is that you've got this awesome tool doing it for you. And then we've also added some additional recording and downloads to what, again, capitalizing on what VEP already had to support native data models, not just the NG911 data model, which will be at the core of Cloud Assign, but it'll also support all of those permitting, dispatch system, 311, 211. We're going to talk about that in just a second. All those other systems that may need to be downstream data consumers can be observed here with the ability to support native data models. And then, of course, we talked about retirement and archive and history of addresses and reporting. We've developed some reports that are targeted at exactly that pain point as well. So I'm really excited to talk about cloud assignment. That's not what the webinar is about today, but I just wanted to throw that in there. One of the future webinars, we are going to have an actual demonstration of the product so that everybody can see it. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that there is a new product on the market in terms of addressing assignment, address change management, address GIS data management that you'll be hearing more about and that we're very excited to offer to the marketplace. So let's see, Jamal, let's jump in on some of those questions.
Hold on, my video starting again. There we go. Yeah, absolutely. And still, great presentation so far. You all have been awesome. Thank you so much. We'll start from the top of the list here that I got. So the first question I have on the docket is, what is 211 and 311? I saw it asked a little bit earlier through the storm of conversation you all are having.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I get a lot of energy even out of seeing all the chat action. I can't necessarily keep up with it all while I'm talking, but I get a lot of energy out of seeing the discussions take place. And you know, even the discussions about what kind of GPS unit to use, how do we address the problems with Google, and we're going to get to some of those questions. So Jamal has been doing a great job of logging those off so that we can take them off here. 211 and 311 are really interesting entities, and not all places have them, not all cities or counties have them, but where they exist, generally speaking, 211 is about reaching and connecting to social services. Sometimes they're about community services. Sometimes you can call 211 and say, hey, you know, where do I get my trash service set up? Other times, I know in San Diego where I used to work, 211 was instrumental in the times of disaster. If you needed evacuation or you needed to find temporary housing, you needed to find some sort of like psychological therapy services or things like that, you could call 211, three-digit number, and get those services. 311 tends to be specifically focused on city services. So the debate among a lot of cities is, do I have a 311 call center where, again, somebody can call and say, hey, I need to set up my water service. Who do I contact? Or there's a possum out in the middle of the road and I need animal control to come pick it up. 311 is the one number to fix it all sort of approach. And so it's 811 is all about call before you dig, so that utilities can get marked before you dig them up. 911 obviously is emergency services. A new one coming on board pretty soon is 988, which is a suicide prevention line, which is an awesome idea for those three-digit calling codes. So I think there's some others as well out there that I don't know. There's also the historical, 411 for information. I don't even know if that still works, but I would bet that if you called 411, they'd be happy to AT&T give you a 50-cent charge on your bill and give you a number, right? So that's what those additional three-digit call codes are.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I saw a question come through, which kind of goes hand in hand possibly with the next question I'm about to ask here. So the original question is, what is the role, if any, of geolocation coordinates and proxies, such as latitude and longitude, plus codes, what 3 words? And I see the question there is like, how would you handle small islands about a road system that requires an address? We're seeing some of the coastal islands needing addresses for maybe one house or most, but I've seen that next gen model handling addresses with what 3 words, Google plus codes, and so on and so forth. And how would you handle those? So kind of a 2-parter question there.
Yeah, Andy, this one's directed to you, so I'll let you take it.
Andy's trying to avoid the gun on that one.
No, I'm like responding and referencing NINA documentation and all kinds of stuff at the same time. I probably shouldn't do that. So the NINA data model does not currently address what 3 words, but I think, and anyone who's involved in any of the newer documentation that's coming out, I think that's something that they're talking about. And I do think that latitude and longitude are in the data model. That's what I'm trying to verify. I think those might be conditional fields, but I'm trying to pull that up right now.
Well, I think you're right, Annie, but let me just say, NG901 is based on getting mobile device location in that geodetic coordinate. So it certainly supports the idea of routing by coordinates. And your GIS data can certainly contain those coordinates, whether they're in the NG901 model or not, right?
Yep.
But you get into what 3 words, Google plus codes, and there's an infinite number of other sort of location systems, I guess I'll call them, that are, you know, super interesting and have their use case to be made. US National Grid coordinates is another one that I put a bump into that ball as well. But they're not going to be used to route 911 calls. And so it's not necessary for NG911's sakes to include any of that in your information. However, that said, there may be some really good reasons, some really compelling reasons to track your what 3 words location for each address, to track your Google Plus code for each address, to set up a whole little sort of related table if you need to do it that way, of these additional location systems, or just add some attributes to your data, because it could be useful. There may be a lot of different reasons to do that, but then next generation 911 has no need for that, and probably will not be seeing that in the data model moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm looking here, and it looks like the latitude and longitude are considered optional, so you could add that for your civic locations. But most of us are calling from cell phones anyway, which would already have that information included.
Awesome. And I know, Jeff, that you asked me to note this one kind of on the end here about when people were talking about the Google, the rapid SOS, the Apple mapping questions kind of at the end and whatnot here. Kind of anything you want to add or kind of link in with that there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got a really great set of crowdsourced answers to that. And I just want to mention that we took the Google URL down. We'll add it to our email that Steph sends out to the list afterwards, advertising the recording. And I'll just throw in there as well that there's so many of those that need to be sort of populated with good addresses. And the frustration comes from the fact that you have to acknowledge why Google has address points to begin with. And that is to sell ads, right? That is to conduct business. And so there was one great comment in there that said, hey, I live in a rural area and they're almost always wrong. And that's because there's not enough people to buy what Google's selling for them to invest the dollars into creating or updating or making those address points better. And so they're an aggregator of address points, right? They bring in NavTech and all the different here data, all the different data, big data providers that you can think about. They aggregate those, and then they send their own vehicles out in really fast changing areas to collect data as well. And so, you know, Google, fill in the blank, right? Google, Apple, any of those apps that you use on a regular basis are doing the same thing. And they're doing it for business purposes, which is why it's really important that NextGen 911 has that addressing component to it. Because if there is no sort of system to consume it or immediate need to have it, and you can't rely on Google or any of those other data providers to do it because there's not a big enough business case to do so. So I think that link will make sure it gets into the sort of show notes, if you will. And there was a really robust discussion about that. So I appreciate everybody's input.
Yeah, and I think hilariously enough, a lot of the questions I was starting to capture was also answered by the chat in turn. So if there was anything missed, please let me know as I go through this too. But kind of moving down to the next question here. Or you have something, Jeff?
Oh, there's more. Sorry, there's more.
Yeah, no.
Glad to hear you got more.
Oh, no, there's quite a bit more.
All right.
So one person asked, is there kind of any simple changes to addressing workflows that can help fill out those POI data sets?
I'll pitch one or two at you, and I'm sure Annie can think of some as well. One of the public safety concepts that might help with this question is that of a non-addressed dispatchable location. And the idea is there's a lot of landmarks throughout a given place, right? There's Founders Square with that great statue. There's the horse barn at the racetrack. There's any number of other sort of landmarks that people will go to. They'll know they're at that landmark, but they won't know the address of that landmark. And so as a dispatcher is taking a call, now not talking about the next gen 911 call delivery process, but rather the resource dispatching process, call takers taking a call and they're trying to verify their location by a non-addressed dispatchable location, right? It just flew out of my head. The very famous statue in New York, the Statue of Liberty. Thank you. Why did that fly out of my head?
These things happen.
Right? It's a national park. And I'm sure that the dispatchers in New York City get calls from there on the regular where they're like, what's your address? Well, I don't know. I'm at the Statue of Liberty, right? So capturing those points of interest, you could certainly create, again, in VEP, a related table entry or an attribute on your GIS data that allows you to sort of give a POI label to a given point. It'll also add a flag perhaps that allows you to say, yes, this is a point of interest. And then when you output that point of interest layer, you're only displaying yes flags and with the label for labeling and recognize that in your mapping products. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and actually, if you've adapted your data to the NINA data model, you do have the additional location information field available to you, as well as a landmark name. So those are two fields that you can use to further define a location, even if you don't have a number.
Well, and let me just say, Annie, there is some upcoming changes to a standard called the Civic Location Data Exchange Format, CLDXF. There will be issued version 2 soon. It's out for public comment, I think now, or that period may actually already be closed. But it's going to change that landmark name field and add some additional sub-addressing fields so that NINA data model will follow the CLDXF. And when that stuff gets into the data model, it'll be even better attuned to this issue.
So stay tuned is what you're saying.
Yeah, hold on. It'll be there in about 5 years.
Hey, looking forward to it nonetheless. Awesome.
Do a webinar when it does, right?
Yeah, exactly. We'll still be here. We're still doing this. So next question here. So are there resources for an alternative to the paper addressing assignment process? I think you might cover that a little bit there.
Yeah, so we're talking about digital transformation, right? Mm-hmm. Annie, you've probably seen more of these than I have, but I've seen some gnarly books, right? Some paper books that have been maintained throughout decades, and maybe even copied at some point and then maintained on top of the copy. And those books are there for sort of archive and historical reference. But in a lot of places, probably most places, it's still the basis of their addressing process. And so the idea of applying digital transformation workflows and tools that will allow you to create these things in a digital way so that you're not doing them on paper and then entering them into GIS later, but it all does front loads the data entry and enables the GIS experts to then become data scientists and data analysts and extracting value from that data instead of just entering it is I think what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And then we're starting to catch up a little bit here, so stay strong, y'all. You got it. So how do we geolocate addresses in 3D? I see that asked a couple times here.
Okay, yeah, 3D GIS. It's a fascinating topic that is still, in my opinion, something that's being formulated, right? Not 3D GIS as a topic, but the use of addressing in a 3D GIS way. Nina has come out with a requirements document, its first version about 3D GIS for 911. And basically what it says is there's some really interesting stuff coming down the way, and we're going to give you some parameters that we think are going to be relevant, but they're all going to be subject to change. We're still a little bit on the bleeding edge for it to really come into concrete requirements. And I was at the NINA Standards and Best Practices Conference last week, and there was a great presentation of this by Brandon Abley, the technical director at NINA. And in fact, there is a ERISA conference next week that I'll just plug real quickly here. The LEAP conference, the Location Enterprise Addressing and Public Safety Conference, which Datamark is sponsoring, is a virtual conference next week that will be surrounding questions just like this. In fact, we have an hour-long session, this very same one by Brandon Abley, about those 3D GIS requirements for public safety. And so I'd really recommend that everybody who can attend that. It'd be a fascinating talk to listen to. And then I'll just wind up the question by saying that the world is our oyster in that regard, and the challenge will be getting the 3D coordinate that we need to represent in the GIS, right? Because a caller will get from a device, a mobile device of any sort, will get a 3D coordinate, but there is this fascinating algorithm and math that has to occur about the confidence factor of that location, as well as a range of distance that will be given. So you'll get a 50 meters at 90% confidence on X, Y, and Z through the systems. And the question then becomes, how do we represent that in a GIS or on a call handling equipment screen in a way that becomes meaningful, and we educate call takers on what they're looking at so that they don't mistake the level of confidence they should have with that coordinate.
Perfect. And also for you all out there, I did link the LEAP conference just there for you. So if you want to find it really easily, don't have to do any of the work. I got you. I think outside of that, though, most of the questions were posted in the chat, and either the rest of y'all wonderful folks or the wonderful Andy has answered all of those. So I believe we are at the end of the questions that I've gathered. Are there any other further questions before we move onward?
I don't think so. I think we hit all the ones that I remember seeing.
Perfect. Hey.
VR goggles. I love it.
Yes, excellent. Let's do it.
Full Minority Report, right?
Yeah.
Let me just, before everybody jumps off, let me just plug our own upcoming virtual events as well. Not only the webinars series, which you're all registered for. The next one coming up will be on GIS data preparation for NG901. It'll be a great one with Annie and Becca and Dustin. And then in March is our own virtual conference. And we really want to do two things in regard to that virtual conference. One is make sure that you know about it so that you can sign up, register for it. It's free. And I believe that our esteemed MC is going to put a link to that here in a second as well. It's a free virtual conference that focuses on what we focus on, obviously, in public safety GIS and addressing GIS, but we're working really hard to make sure that it's well-rounded and it's very interesting, not only to GIS nerds, but also to addressing authorities, also to public safety folks and GIS in general, at the convergence of 3D GIS and BIM and call taking and address assignment and all of those things. And so let me just mention the second thing that I want to make sure you know about that virtual conference is that we actually have an open call for papers. And so if anybody has a great use case study, there was some discussion about how to use a GPS to verify address information. If you think you could do a 30-minute presentation on your use case study of using a Trimble unit to go verify address information in GIS, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love for you to submit a paper for that to that virtual event. And so I'm going to ask the MC Jamal as well to put a link to the call for papers in there, and we'll get Stephanie to put it in the email too. But I'd really love to see a very well-rounded representation of use cases by clients, by potential clients, not just by us, even though we'll obviously be sharing our expertise there. We want to make sure that it's a good virtual conference where everybody can learn a lot. So we'll plug that March 21st through the 24th. And the three of us will be intimately involved in that, so you'll get to see our lovely faces more. And then in April, looks like our topic is going to be public safety data enhanced, about synchronizing, verifying, and aggregating. We've got a lot of exciting products coming out, and this one will feature a mobile collection product that we've been working on for you, and discuss kind of the difficult challenges of using data in the field and collecting data in the field, and some of the solutions we've come up to help with that. So really hope that everybody will take the opportunity to join these webinars, join our virtual conference. We really appreciate the energy in the conversation in the chat today. And I hope this presentation has been beneficial. And as always, Annie did an awesome job. And I love that we've added our MC Jamal, and we're going to be bringing him back more. So thanks everybody for your time and attention today.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. Stay safe.
Hey, no, thank you all. Y'all take care.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.